Admiral Zethkar stood before the massive holographic display that dominated the command center of the hegemony flagship, Eternal Dominance. The display showed a small blue-green planet orbiting a yellow star, its surface dotted with lights that indicated a thriving civilization. The third planet from the star, locally called Earth, represented another routine addition to the hegemony's ever-expanding territory. "Analysis complete, Admiral," reported his tactical officer, a tall creature whose crystalline skin reflected the bridge lights in prismatic patterns. "The inhabitants call themselves humans. Pre-warp civilization, but they have achieved basic space travel within their system. Nuclear capabilities confirmed. Population approximately 8 billion. Zethkar nodded, his three eyes focusing on different aspects of the data streaming across secondary displays. In his 4 centuries of service to the hegemony, he had overseen the integration of 47 species. Each followed the same pattern: show overwhelming force, deliver the ultimatum, accept surrender, and begin the incorporation process. Simple, efficient, and effective. "Fleet composition?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be more than sufficient. 700 ships of the line, Admiral. 200 dreadnoughts, 300 cruisers, and 200 support vessels. The Eternal Dominance serves as flagship, with the other 9 super dreadnoughts providing command support. The numbers were staggering. Each dreadnought could crack a planet's crust if necessary, though such extreme measures were rarely required. Most species submitted once they comprehended the mathematics of their situation. The hegemony had refined intimidation into an art form. "Communications array ready to transmit the standard ultimatum," added the communications officer. "All frequencies prepared for broad-spectrum broadcast." Zethkar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Soon the system would become Hegemony Territory 2847, its resources feeding the great machine of galactic civilization, its people finding purpose within the ordered structure that had brought peace to thousands of worlds. The humans would resist initially. They always did, but within a few rotations they would see the futility of opposition. "Begin transmission." The communications array powered up, sending its message across all electromagnetic spectrums toward the small planet. The ultimatum was simple, translated into the dominant human languages, and absolutely clear in its implications. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was pulling a double shift at the Arecibo Observatory when every piece of equipment in the facility suddenly came alive. The radio telescope swung toward space as if controlled by an external force, receivers lighting up with signals so strong they threatened to overload the systems. She rushed from station to station, trying to make sense of the cacophony of data flooding in. "Dr. Morrison," she called to the observatory director, who was already sprinting down the corridor toward the main control room. "Every dish is picking up the same signal. It's coming from outside the solar system, but the signal strength is impossible. Whatever's sending this has to be massive." Dr. Morrison's hands flew over the controls, his weathered face pale in the glow of the monitors. "It's not just us," he said grimly. "I'm getting reports from facilities worldwide. Every radio telescope, every satellite, every antenna is receiving the same transmission. Sarah, start recording everything. And get me the President's science advisor on the emergency line." The message, when decoded, sent shockwaves through every government on Earth. The translation was perfect, appearing simultaneously in English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and dozens of other languages. Whoever had sent it understood human communication better than humans themselves. "People of Earth," the message began, "you are now within the sphere of influence of the galactic hegemony. Your species has achieved sufficient technological development to warrant inclusion in the galactic community under hegemony administration. Resistance to integration is futile and will result in the elimination of your civilization. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to prepare for the arrival of hegemony and corporation forces. Designate representatives to facilitate the transition process. Your planet's resources, including your population, will be allocated according to hegemony efficiency protocols. Compliance ensures survival. Opposition ensures extinction. This communication marks the end of your species' independence. Prepare accordingly." The message repeated continuously across all frequencies, immune to any human attempts at interference or jamming. Within hours, the world's governments were in crisis sessions. Military commanders reviewed arsenals that suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate. Scientists calculated the energy requirements for transmitting such a signal across interstellar distances and arrived at numbers that defied comprehension. President Martinez stared at the briefing papers spread across her desk in the Oval Office. "Give me options," she said to the assembled Joint Chiefs and cabinet members. General Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, cleared his throat. Ma'am, if even half of what our scientists are telling us about the power behind this transmission is accurate, we're facing a force beyond anything in human experience. The energy required to broadcast this signal would dwarf our entire global power output. Are we talking about surrender? Asked Secretary of Defense Williams. We're talking about survival, Harrison replied grimly. Every war game scenario ends the same way. If they can travel between stars and possess this level of technology, conventional military resistance would be suicide. What about nuclear weapons? Suggested CIA Director Thompson. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the president's science advisor, shook her head. If they can cross interstellar space, they've solved problems that make our most advanced weapons look like stone axes. Nuclear bombs might as well be firecrackers. President Martinez stood and walked to the window overlooking the Rose Garden. So we surrender? 8 billion people, the entire history of human civilization, everything we've built, dreamed, and accomplished. We just hand it over to aliens because they have bigger guns? Ma'am, General Harrison said quietly, sometimes tactical withdrawal is the only rational choice. We can't fight stars. But even as the world's leaders debated surrender, other voices began to emerge. In military academies, young officers studied the message and saw not an insurmountable force but an enemy making assumptions. In university research labs, scientists analyzed the signal and noticed patterns that suggested this wasn't the first time the aliens had delivered such ultimatums. In small towns and large cities, ordinary people read the news and felt something the aliens might not have expected: anger. Captain Jack Reaper Morrison, no relation to the observatory director, sat in the pilot's lounge at Edwards Air Force Base, reading the message for the dozenth time. Around him, fellow test pilots, engineers, and support staff huddled in small groups, their conversations ranging from denial to despair to something approaching rage. 72 days, muttered Colonel Rebecca Torres, one of the most experienced fighter pilots in the Air Force. They give us 72 days to prepare for slavery. Read it again, Morrison said, his voice thoughtful. Look at the language they use. Resistance is futile. Opposition ensures extinction. They're not trying to negotiate or communicate. They're trying to intimidate. Because intimidation works, Torres replied. When you've got the bigger stick, you use it? Morrison shook his head. But intimidation only works if your enemy thinks like you do. But what if we don't? The question hung in the air, but around the country, similar conversations were taking place. In Pentagon briefing rooms where young analysts studied enemy psychology. In NASA facilities where engineers who had spent their careers solving impossible problems looked at the new data with professional interest rather than fear. In military units where soldiers who had volunteered to face death for abstract ideals like freedom and justice found themselves facing a very concrete threat. The world's governments might be preparing for surrender, but humanity was preparing for something else entirely. 3 days after the message arrived, President Martinez received an encrypted communication from an unexpected source. The sender was listed as Terran Defense Initiative, and the message was brief. Ma'am, with respect, surrender is not the only option. We'd like to present an alternative proposal. The best defense humanity has isn't our weapons. It's that we don't think like they do. The message included detailed technical specifications, strategic assessments, and what appeared to be the preliminary design for a response that would shock the hegemony more than any weapon ever could. Admiral Zethkar reviewed the reports from his intelligence division with growing puzzlement. Standard protocol following ultimatum delivery involved monitoring the target species for signs of compliance preparation, communication with colonial administrators, cessation of military activities, and the formation of transition governments. Instead, human activity had increased dramatically across all categories. They're launching spacecraft, reported intelligence officer Cathara, her voice carrying notes of confusion. Multiple launches daily from various points on the planet. Cargo vessels, communication satellites, and what appear to be hastily constructed observation platforms. Military activity? Intensifying, Admiral. Rather than standing down their forces, they appear to be conducting accelerated training exercises. Most peculiar are their communication patterns. There's been a massive increase in encrypted military traffic, but it's being routed through civilian networks in ways that make it nearly impossible to intercept. Zethkar's middle eye focused on the tactical display while his outer eyes continued to review data feeds. In 4 centuries of service, he had never encountered this pattern of behavior. Species faced with hegemony ultimatums either began immediate compliance procedures or launched futile military preparations that served only to demonstrate their technological inferiority. The humans were doing neither. Perhaps they simply require additional time to comprehend their situation. suggested his chief of staff. Their technology is particularly primitive. They may not fully understand the implications of our message. But Zethkar wasn't convinced. The energy and coordination of human activities suggested not confusion but purpose. Whatever the humans were planning, it fell outside the parameters of expected behavior. For the first time in centuries, an admiral of the hegemony found himself dealing with an unpredictable variable. He made a note to begin preliminary bombardment preparations. If the humans were planning some form of resistance, it would be brief and instructive to other species who might harbor similar delusions. 68 days remained until the hegemony fleet's arrival, and humanity was not preparing for surrender. In underground facilities around the world, teams of engineers, scientists, and military personnel worked around the clock on projects that would have been impossible just months earlier. International borders had become meaningless as resources and expertise flowed freely between nations united by a common thread. The question wasn't whether humanity could build better weapons than aliens who crossed between stars. The question was whether humanity could build something the aliens wouldn't expect. The answer, they hoped, was yes. Captain Jack Morrison stood on the observation deck of the hastily constructed orbital platform designated Defiance Station, watching the Earth turn slowly beneath him. 67 days had passed since the alien ultimatum, and the planet below looked different than it had 2 months ago. City lights burned brighter as factories operated around the clock. New launch facilities had sprouted on every continent, their flames visible even from orbit as they hurled humanity's desperate gambit into space. "Final systems check complete," reported Commander Sarah Lou over the comm system. "All stations report ready for the big show." Morrison nodded, though his attention remained fixed on the small blue marble that had given birth to a species apparently too stubborn to know when it was beaten. Bound him. Defiance Station hummed with activity as representatives from every major nation on Earth prepared for humanity's response to the hegemony ultimatum. It wasn't the response anyone had expected. "Incoming transmission from Mission Control," announced the communications officer. "President Martinez is on the line." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the president's face. Behind her, Morrison could see the controlled chaos of the Joint Command Center that had been established beneath Cheyenne Mountain. Military officers, scientists, and diplomats from dozens of nations worked side by side, their uniforms and languages different, but their purpose identical. "Captain Morrison," the president began, "in 4 hours, the hegemony fleet will reach communication range. Are we ready?" Morrison glanced around the observation deck at the assembled team. Scientists who had abandoned their research to solve engineering problems in weeks rather than years. Military officers who had set aside traditional doctrines to embrace something entirely new. Engineers who had built the impossible because the possible wasn't enough. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Humanity is ready to give our answer." 400 light hours from Earth, Admiral Zethkar received the first reports from his advanced reconnaissance drones. The small automated scouts had been observing the human system for the past several planetary rotations, gathering intelligence on defensive preparations and cataloging industrial capabilities. What they found defied explanation. "Admiral," reported Intelligence Officer Cathara, her crystalline features reflecting her confusion, "the humans have constructed 17 orbital platforms around their planet. None of them conform to any known military configuration." Zethkar studied the holographic projections showing the human constructions. They were clearly artificial, but their design suggested no obvious defensive purpose. No weapons emplacements were visible, no shield generators, no communication arrays that might serve as command centers. Instead, each platform appeared to be built around a single large chamber with extensive life support systems. What is their function? Unknown, Admiral. Our analysis suggests they are designed to house approximately 50 organic beings each, but their purpose remains unclear. Additionally, the humans have launched over 300 small craft into high orbital trajectories. These vessels appear to be communications platforms rather than weapons systems. The Admiral's tactical staff exchanged glances. In their combined experience, they had encountered every form of defensive preparation imaginable. Some species built massive orbital fortresses. Others scattered their populations to hidden colonies. A few had even attempted to evacuate their systems entirely, though such efforts inevitably failed against hegemony pursuit capabilities. But this pattern was unlike anything in their databases. "Perhaps it's a communications network," suggested Commander Veltar. "They may be attempting to coordinate resistance across their system." "Or evacuation platforms," added another officer. "Though with only 850 possible evacuees, it would be a purely symbolic gesture." Zethkar's middle eye continued to focus on the strange orbital constructions while his outer eyes reviewed tactical assessments. The humans had made no attempt to militarize their platforms, construct defensive weapons, or deploy any technology that could threaten even the smallest hegemony vessel. Whatever they were planning, it posed no tactical threat to his fleet. "Continue monitoring," he ordered. "We will learn their purpose soon enough." But as the hours passed and the hegemony fleet moved closer to Earth, the human activities became increasingly puzzling. The orbital platforms had activated powerful communication arrays, but instead of directing defensive communications toward human military units, they were broadcasting toward empty space. The signals were strong, coherent, and utterly without apparent purpose. At exactly the moment when hegemony communication protocols indicated optimal range for receiving surrender negotiations, Admiral Zeth Kar instead received something unprecedented in the history of galactic conquest, a message from the humans that wasn't a surrender. The transmission came from the largest orbital platform, designated by the humans as Defiance Station. The name alone was unusual. Most species chose neutral or diplomatic designations for their surrender vessels, but the content of the message was what made Admiral Zethkar's tactical staff freeze in stunned silence. "Admiral Zethkar of the Galactic Hegemony," the message began, delivered by a human in military uniform standing in what appeared to be a standard bridge configuration. "This is Captain Jack Morrison of the Terran Defense Forces. We have received your ultimatum and wish to respond. Standard protocol, so far." Zethkar prepared to receive the customary expressions of submission and requests for terms. "We decline your offer." The words hung in the bridge's atmosphere like a physical presence. Zethkar's outer eyes swiveled to check his translation systems, certain that some error in language processing had occurred. But the human continued speaking, and the meaning remained impossibly clear. "We understand that you possess superior technology, larger numbers, and greater firepower. We acknowledge that resistance appears futile by any rational calculation. However, we have concluded that rationality is overrated." Thara looked up from her console, her crystalline features reflecting a rainbow of confusion. "Admiral, there must be some error in our translation protocols. The message appears to indicate rejection of integration terms." But the human was still speaking. "We cannot defeat your fleet in conventional combat. We cannot match your technology or challenge your supremacy in space. We lack the weapons to threaten your ships or the shields to protect our planet. By every logical measure, we should surrender immediately and submit to incorporation into your hegemony." Zethkar found himself leaning forward, his three eyes fixed on the transmission. Finally, reason was asserting itself. The humans had recognized the futility of resistance and were preparing to submit. The message was simply unusually elaborate in its acknowledgement of hegemony superiority. "However," the human continued, "we have discovered something that may interest you. Your ultimatum contained an assumption that we believe may be flawed." The Admiral's middle eye narrowed. Flawed assumptions were not possible. Hegemony analysis was precise, thorough, and based on the behavioral patterns of thousands of species across 4 millennia of expansion. There were no flawed assumptions. "You assumed that we would respond rationally to your ultimatum. You calculated our response based on standard military theory, economic incentives, and survival instincts. Your models predicted that faced with overwhelming force, we would choose submission over extinction." The human paused, and something in his expression suggested that what came next would be important. "Your assumption was incorrect. We don't always respond rationally. Sometimes we respond with what we call spite." The word didn't translate properly into hegemony standard, requiring the communication systems to provide a complex definition involving irrational opposition to superior force based on emotional rather than logical considerations. Zethkar's staff exchanged glances that indicated confusion rather than understanding. "Therefore," Captain Morrison continued, "we propose an alternative to both surrender and conventional resistance. We challenge the galactic hegemony to single combat." The bridge fell absolutely silent. Even the background hum of the ship's system seemed to pause as the words registered. Single combat challenges were a theoretical concept from primitive societies, mentioned in anthropological studies of pre-spaceflight civilizations. No species had ever proposed such a thing to the hegemony. "Our terms are simple," the human continued. "One ship from your fleet against one ship from ours. Victory determines the fate of Earth. If your champion wins, we will submit to incorporation without further resistance. If our champion wins, your fleet withdraws from our system and leaves humanity independent." Commander Veltar was the first to recover from shock. "Admiral, this is clearly some form of primitive ritualistic behavior. We should ignore this communication and proceed with standard integration protocols." But Zethkar found himself oddly intrigued by the proposal. In 4 centuries of service, he had never encountered a species willing to stake their entire civilization on a single engagement. The concept was so illogical, so contrary to every principle of military strategy, that it possessed a certain twisted fascination. "What vessel do they propose to field?" he asked. Katara checked her instruments. "Admiral, sensors indicate a single human spacecraft departing from their planet. It appears to be improvised. Mass approximately 12,000 tons, no detectable weapon systems, minimal shielding, and propulsion technology centuries behind hegemony standard." The description was almost insulting in its inadequacy. 12,000 tons would classify as a light courier vessel by hegemony standards, barely suitable for system patrol duties. The largest ships in Zethkar's fleet massed over 2 million tons and carried enough firepower to sterilize continents. "They're sending a courier against a dreadnought," murmured Tactical Officer Urthon. "Either this is elaborate suicide, or they possess some technology that our sensors cannot detect." Zethkar considered the possibilities. Hidden weapon systems were theoretically possible, though unlikely given humanity's demonstrated technological limitations. Concealed allies from other species were ruled out by long-range sensors that detected no non-human signatures in the system. The most probable explanation was that the humans had simply chosen an elaborate form of surrender, preferring the dignity of a hopeless fight to the humiliation of submission. It was, he decided, oddly admirable in its futility. "We will honor their challenge," he announced, surprising his staff. "The Judgment of Stars will serve as our champion." The Judgment of Stars was one of his 9 super dreadnoughts, a vessel capable of cracking planetary crusts and armed with enough firepower to engage entire fleets. Against a human courier, it was the definition of overwhelming force. The engagement would last seconds, providing the humans with their desired glorious defeat while demonstrating hegemony superiority to any other species monitoring the encounter. "Admiral," protested Commander Veltar, "this sets an unprecedented precedent. If other species learn that the hegemony can be drawn into single combat challenges, they will learn that challenging the hegemony results in immediate and absolute defeat." Zethkar interrupted. "The encounter will be recorded and distributed throughout known space. Let every species see what happens when primitive civilizations attempt to dictate terms to their superiors." As the orders went out to prepare the Judgment of Stars for engagement, Admiral Zethkar reviewed the tactical situation once more. The human vessel was approaching at a leisurely pace, making no attempt at stealth or evasive maneuvers. Its course was direct, its intentions clear, and its fate sealed. What puzzled him was the complete absence of fear or desperation in the human communications. Captain Morrison had delivered his challenge with what appeared to be confidence, as if he genuinely believed his improvised courier could threaten a hegemony super dreadnought. The irrationality was so complete that it suggested either insanity or some factor that hegemony intelligence had failed to detect. But as the human vessel closed the distance, Admiral Zethkar's sensors confirmed what logic had already established. The approaching ship was exactly what it appeared to be. An improvised vessel built from human industrial technology, armed with primitive weapons, and crewed by beings whose life signs indicated normal stress responses rather than the calm of fatalistic determination. They genuinely believed they could win. The realization was so absurd that Zethkar found himself almost admiring their delusion. In a universe governed by mathematical certainties and technological hierarchies, the humans had chosen to believe in impossibility. It was illogical, irrational, and utterly doomed. It was also something that no hegemony tactical manual had prepared him to understand. As the human ship approached weapons range, Admiral Zethkar opened a communication channel to Captain Morrison. "Captain, you approach certain destruction. This is your final opportunity to withdraw your challenge and proceed with standard integration protocols." The response came immediately, delivered with what sounded like genuine cheerfulness. "Admiral, we appreciate your concern, but we're good. See you in a few minutes." The communication cut off, leaving the bridge in bewildered silence. "Admiral," reported the tactical officer aboard the Judgment of Stars, "human vessel has entered weapons range, requesting permission to engage." Zethkar looked one final time at the small ship approaching his super dreadnought, a vessel so outmatched that the encounter barely qualified as combat. Whatever lesson the humans hoped to teach the galaxy about the futility of challenging superior force, they would learn it themselves in the next few moments. "Permission granted," he ordered. "End this." But as the Judgment of Stars powered up its main weapons array, Admiral Zethkar could not escape the feeling that he was missing something important about the species that had just challenged the assembled might of galactic civilization with a single improvised ship and apparently unshakable confidence in the impossible. Captain Elena Vasquez guided the improvised human vessel Indomitable Spirit through space with the casual competence of someone who had spent her career solving impossible problems. Behind her, the ship hummed with activity as her crew of 50 prepared for an encounter that every mathematical model said they could not survive. The mood aboard was not one of desperation or resignation, but rather the focused intensity of professionals approaching a particularly challenging puzzle. "Weapons range in 30 seconds, announced Lieutenant Commander Chen from the tactical station. Hegemony Super Dreadnought is powering up what appears to be their primary energy arrays. Vasquez nodded, her attention divided between the approaching alien vessel and the status displays surrounding her command position. The Indomitable Spirit was exactly what it appeared to be. A hastily constructed ship, built from human industrial technology and armed with the most powerful weapons humanity could devise. It was also completely inadequate for engaging a Hegemony Super Dreadnought in conventional combat. Fortunately, they weren't planning a conventional engagement. "Communications array ready?" she asked. "All 17 orbital platforms standing by," replied Communications Officer Park. "Defiant Station confirms ready status." "Ground control reports all systems nominal. Engineering, how are our passengers?" Chief Engineer Rodriguez checked his displays. "All 47 are stable and ready for deployment. The modification to the cargo bay worked perfectly. Life support is holding steady, and the transport systems test green across the board." Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. The modification to the cargo bay had been the most critical part of their plan, and also the most difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't been briefed on humanity's actual strategy. To external observers, the Indomitable Spirit appeared to be a standard assault vessel carrying a crew of 50. In reality, it was a transport ship carrying the most unusual cargo in human history. "Admiral Zethkar is hailing us," announced Park. "He's offering us one final chance to withdraw." "Put him through," Vasquez ordered. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the Hegemony flagship. Admiral Zethkar stood in the center, his 3 eyes fixed on the human transmission with what appeared to be genuine puzzlement. "Captain Vasquez," the Admiral began, his voice carrying undertones of what might have been respect, "your vessel is 30 seconds from destruction. I offer you this final opportunity to submit to integration protocols and spare your crew." Vasquez studied the alien Admiral's face, noting the subtle indicators of confusion that her briefings had taught her to recognize. The Hegemony had based their entire approach on the assumption that they understood how civilized species behaved when faced with overwhelming force. They had never encountered a species that refused to behave according to their models. "Admiral," she replied, "I appreciate your offer, but we're committed to our course of action. However, I would like to make one request before we begin." Zethkar's middle eye focused on her with apparent interest. "Speak." "Our cargo bay contains 47 representatives of human civilization. They are not military personnel, but rather artists, musicians, philosophers, scientists, and storytellers. They have requested the opportunity to meet with representatives of your species before the engagement begins." The Admiral's staff exchanged glances of bewilderment. In 4 millennia of expansion, no species had ever requested cultural exchange in the minutes before military engagement. The request was so unprecedented that Hegemony protocols contained no guidance for responding to it. "Captain," Zethkar said slowly, "you are requesting permission to conduct first contact protocols during active combat operations?" "Not exactly," Vasquez replied. "We're requesting permission to conduct last contact protocols. Our representatives would like to share examples of human culture with your crew before we engage in what will likely be our final battle. Think of it as a cultural goodbye." The absurdity of the request was so complete that Admiral Zethkar found himself momentarily speechless. The humans were asking to perform artistic presentations while under the guns of a super dreadnought that could atomize their vessel in seconds. It was either the most elaborate suicide ritual in galactic history or evidence of a form of insanity so profound that it defied classification. "You wish to perform music while we destroy your ship?" he asked, certain that translation errors were distorting the communication. "Among other things," Vasquez confirmed cheerfully. "We figure if we're going to be the last free humans, we might as well go out doing what humans do best, being unreasonably creative in the face of impossible odds." Commander Veltar leaned toward Admiral Zethkar and whispered urgently, "Sir, this is clearly a delaying tactic. We should proceed with immediate engagement." But Zethkar found himself strangely fascinated by the request. In 4 centuries of military service, he had seen species react to impending defeat with desperation, rage, resignation, or terror. Never had he encountered a species that responded with requests for cultural exchange. The anthropological implications alone were unprecedented. Very well, he decided. You may transport your representatives to the judgment of stars. You have 15 minutes to conclude your performance before we proceed with combat operations. The decision sent shockwaves through the hegemony command structure. Never in recorded history had an admiral agreed to receive enemy representatives aboard a warship during active engagement. But Admiral Zethkar's curiosity had been piqued by this species that consistently refused to behave according to established patterns. "Thank you, Admiral," Captain Vasquez replied. Initiating transport now. The transport beam that activated aboard the Indomitable Spirit was a standard hegemony technology, though one that humanity had somehow acquired and modified for their purposes. 47 humans materialized in the cargo bay of the Judgment of Stars, causing immediate confusion among the hegemony crew who had expected armed soldiers or desperate negotiators. Instead, they found themselves hosting a group that included a violinist, a poet, a mathematician who specialized in fractal geometry, a chef, an elderly grandmother who told stories, a young man with a guitar, a woman carrying what appeared to be artistic supplies, and dozens of others whose purposes were entirely unclear from a military perspective. "Permission to begin our presentation?" asked the apparent leader of the group, a middle-aged woman whose calm demeanor suggested she was either remarkably brave or utterly insane. Admiral Zethkar, who had materialized in his cargo bay to personally observe this unprecedented encounter, gestured his consent. Around him, his crew maintained combat readiness while simultaneously trying to understand what they were witnessing. What followed was 15 minutes that would be studied by xenoanthropologists for generations. The humans began with music, not the military songs or battle hymns that might be expected from a warrior culture, but rather a complex piece that the violinist explained was called The Four Seasons. As the music filled the cargo bay, something unexpected happened among the hegemony crew. They stopped moving. Hegemony culture was precise, efficient, and functional. Music existed for ceremonial purposes or to enhance work efficiency, but never for pure aesthetic experience. The concept of beauty for its own sake was not unknown to them, but it was not central to their civilization. As the human music washed over them, many hegemony crew members experienced something entirely outside their normal range of experience. The mathematician followed the music with a presentation about mathematical beauty, showing how human art incorporated geometric principles that the hegemony had classified purely as engineering tools. The chef prepared a simple meal using ingredients from the Indomitable Spirit, explaining how humans had elevated the biological necessity of nutrition into an art form called cuisine. The storyteller told a brief tale about a species that had learned to find joy in the face of extinction. But it was the poet who created the moment that changed everything. She stood before the assembled alien crew and spoke words that the translation system struggled to render properly. "We are the species that looked at the darkness between the stars and decided to fill it with light. We are the ones who saw infinity and chose to explore it. We are the civilization that discovered death was inevitable and responded by creating art to outlive us." Her words hung in the air as she continued, "You offer us efficiency, order, purpose within your great machine. But we have discovered something else. The purpose of existence is not to be efficient. It is to be human. And sometimes being human means choosing beautiful failure over ugly success." Admiral Zethkar found himself staring at the human poet, his three eyes focused on her with an intensity that surprised him. Her words described concepts that were not merely foreign to hegemony culture. They were antithetical to everything the hegemony had built across 4 millennia of expansion. "You speak of choosing failure," he said. "Failure serves no purpose. It accomplishes nothing." The poet smiled with genuine warmth. "Admiral, with respect, that's where you're wrong. Failure accomplishes something very important. It proves that the attempt was more important than the outcome. Today, humanity will fail to defeat your fleet, but we will succeed in proving that we chose to be ourselves rather than becoming part of something else." The 15 minutes concluded with the humans performing a simple song that required no instruments. Just 47 voices joined in harmony. The words spoke of home, of hope, of love, that persisted even in the face of loss. As their voices filled the cargo bay, many of the hegemony crew found themselves experiencing an emotion their language struggled to define, a sense of profound sadness mixed with admiration for something beautiful that was about to be destroyed. When the song ended, the human representatives prepared to return to their ship. But before they left, the elderly grandmother approached Admiral Zethkar and handed him something small and fragile, a hand-carved wooden figure of a human child. "For your collection," she said simply, "so someone remembers that we were here." As the humans transported back to the indomitable spirit, Admiral Zethkar stood in his cargo bay holding the small wooden figure and trying to understand what had just occurred. His crew maintained their positions, but their efficiency had been subtly altered by the encounter. They moved with the same precision, but something in their movements suggested they were thinking about things that had nothing to do with military operations. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, "the human vessel has resumed combat positioning. Requesting permission to engage." Zethkar looked at the small wooden figure in his hand, then at the tactical display showing the hopelessly outmatched human vessel. For the first time in 4 centuries of service, he found himself hesitating before giving a combat order. "Admiral?" prompted his tactical officer. The hesitation lasted only a moment, but in that moment, Admiral Zethkar realized that the humans had accomplished something unprecedented. They had made a hegemony. Admiral questioned the inevitability of hegemony victory, not through superior weapons or tactics, but through the simple demonstration that some things were more important than survival. "Engage the target," he ordered, but his voice carried undertones of something that his crew had never heard from him before: regret. The Judgment of Stars powered up its main weapons array, energy readings climbing toward the levels necessary to vaporize the approaching human vessel. But aboard the human ship, Captain Vasquez was monitoring readings that had nothing to do with weapons or shields. "All orbital platforms report ready," announced Communications Officer Park. "Ground control confirms optimal synchronization. Engineering status of our actual cargo?" Chief Engineer Rodriguez smiled. "All 47 ambassadors report successful mission completion. Phase 1 of the operation was a complete success." Vasquez nodded. The 47 representatives who had visited the hegemony ship had indeed been artists, musicians, poets, and storytellers. But they had also been something else, the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation in human history. For 15 minutes they had wandered freely through an alien super-dreadnought, observing, recording, and most importantly, transmitting everything they experienced back to Earth through quantum-entangled communication devices hidden in their artistic supplies. Every sensor reading, every technical specification, every detail of hegemony technology and crew psychology had been beamed instantly to the 17 orbital platforms surrounding Earth. The platforms that Admiral Zethkar had dismissed as communications arrays were actually the most powerful computational matrix ever assembled by human civilization, designed for one purpose: real-time analysis and tactical adaptation. "Weapons range achieved," reported Chen from Tactical. "Admiral Zethkar is hailing us again," added Park. Vasquez accepted the communication, and the hegemony admiral appeared on her screen. His expression suggested confusion mixed with something that might have been respect. "Captain Vasquez," he began, "your representatives have concluded their performance. I am required to inform you that this engagement will now proceed. I regret the necessity." The admission of regret from a hegemony admiral was unprecedented, and Vasquez noted it with interest. Phase 1 had succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections. They had successfully demonstrated that humanity possessed something the hegemony couldn't understand, calculate, or incorporate into their models. "Admiral," she replied, "we thank you for honoring our request." "Before you fire, may I ask you a question?" Zethkar's middle eye fixed on her. "Speak. In your 4,000 years of expansion, how many species have volunteered to be incorporated into your hegemony?" The question caught the Admiral off guard. "Volunteered? All species submit once they comprehend the futility of resistance. Submission is the logical response to superior force." Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. "But how many chose to join you because they wanted to become part of something greater than themselves, rather than because they had no choice?" Admiral Zethkar found himself considering the question with an intensity that surprised him. In 4 millennia of expansion, the hegemony had incorporated thousands of species through overwhelming force followed by efficient integration. But voluntary membership? Species that actively sought to become part of the hegemony rather than submitting to inevitable conquest? The number was 0. "The distinction is irrelevant," he finally replied. "Efficiency of integration is the primary concern." "I disagree," Vasquez said quietly. "The distinction is everything. Admiral, what you're about to destroy isn't just a ship or a species. It's the possibility that someone might choose to stand beside you instead of being forced to kneel before you." The words hit Admiral Zethkar with unexpected force. For 4 centuries he had served as an instrument of hegemony expansion, bringing order and efficiency to chaotic systems across the galaxy. But he had never considered the possibility that some species might offer something valuable enough to justify treating them as allies rather than subjects. "Captain," he said slowly, "you speak of possibilities that do not exist within hegemony protocols. Then maybe, Vasquez replied with a smile that somehow managed to be both sad and hopeful. It's time to write new protocols. The communication ended, leaving Admiral Zethkar staring at a tactical display that showed a single human vessel facing impossible odds with apparent confidence. Everything about the encounter had violated his understanding of how rational species behaved when faced with extinction. The humans had demonstrated creativity, courage, and a commitment to principles that transcended survival itself. They had also, he realized with growing certainty, demonstrated something else entirely. They had been conducting intelligence-gathering operations under the cover of cultural exchange, using their 15-minute performance to learn everything they needed to know about hegemony technology and tactics. Admiral, reported his tactical officer, energy readings from the human vessel are spiking beyond expected parameters. They appear to be powering up systems that our sensors did not detect during initial analysis. For the first time in 4 centuries, Admiral Zethkar felt something he had never experienced in combat, uncertainty about the outcome of an engagement. The humans had surprised him repeatedly throughout this encounter, and he was beginning to suspect that their surprises were far from over. "All ships, elevated alert status," he ordered. "Something tells me this engagement is about to become considerably more interesting than projected." Aboard the Indomitable Spirit, Captain Vasquez watched her displays as 17 orbital platforms around Earth synchronized their computational matrices and began broadcasting a signal that would change the course of galactic history. Phase 2 was about to begin, and with it, humanity's real answer to the hegemony ultimatum. The Judgment of Stars fired. 23 separate energy beams, each capable of cracking continents, converged on the location where the Indomitable Spirit should have been. Instead, they struck empty space as the human vessel vanished, in a manner that violated every principle of physics the hegemony understood. "Impossible," breathed Tactical Officer Ruthon, his instrument struggling to process what they had just recorded. Captain Vasquez's vessel simply ceased to exist in normal space-time. Admiral Zethkar stared at the tactical display where moments before a hopelessly outmatched human ship had been approaching certain destruction. His sensors detected no debris, no energy signature from a destroyed vessel, no indication of where the Indomitable Spirit had gone. It had simply vanished between one microsecond and the next. "Sensor ghost?" suggested Commander Veltar. "Some form of advanced stealth technology?" But even as he spoke, the words lacked conviction. Hegemony sensors were designed to penetrate every known form of concealment, from basic optical camouflage to quantum-level displacement fields. Nothing in the galaxy could simply disappear from their detection grid. "Admiral," reported Communications Officer Girath, "we're receiving a transmission from everywhere." Zethkar's 3 eyes focused on his communications officer with confusion. "Clarify your report." "Sir, the transmission is originating from 17 different points around the planet simultaneously. All 17 signals are identical, synchronized to the nanosecond, and broadcast on frequencies that penetrate our communication shielding. The message is addressed to you personally. The main screen activated, revealing not Captain Vasquez aboard her ship, but rather a woman Zethkar recognized as one of the artists who had visited his vessel minutes earlier. She stood in what appeared to be a control room, filled with equipment that looked distinctly non-human in design, though somehow familiar. "Admiral Zethkar," she began. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of the Terran Defense Initiative. I believe we need to have a conversation." Admiral's staff exchanged glances of bewilderment. Dr. Chen had been introduced as a mathematician specializing in fractal geometry, not a military commander. Her presence aboard one of the orbital platforms rather than the Indomitable Spirit suggested planning far more complex than a simple challenge to single combat. "Dr. Chen," Zethkar replied, his voice carrying undertones of growing respect for human deception capabilities. "Where is Captain Vasquez?" Chen smiled with what appeared to be genuine amusement. "Captain Vasquez is exactly where she needs to be, Admiral, but her location is less important than what we need to discuss. Specifically, we need to talk about assumptions." "What assumptions?" "The assumptions your species made about humanity when you sent your ultimatum. You assumed we would respond according to standard models of civilized behavior. You assumed that faced with overwhelming force we would either surrender or engage in futile resistance. You assumed that our technology was centuries behind yours." Admiral Zethkar's middle eye fixed on the transmission with growing intensity. "Our analysis was thorough and accurate. Human technology is demonstrably inferior to hegemony standard." "Some of it is," Chen agreed. "But Admiral, you made one critical error in your assessment. You assumed that the technology we chose to show you was the only technology we possess. The implications of her words sent shockwaves through the bridge of the eternal dominance. If humanity possessed advanced technology that had been deliberately concealed from hegemony sensors, then every analysis of their capabilities was potentially flawed. Explain, Zethkar demanded. Chen gestured, and the screen split to show technical schematics that made the Admiral's staff gasp in recognition. The display showed detailed blueprints of hegemony ship design, weapon systems, shield configurations, and technological specifications that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. 47 minutes ago, Chen continued. 47 human intelligence operatives spent 15 minutes aboard your super dreadnought. During that time, they successfully recorded every aspect of your technology, from your energy generation systems to your gravitational manipulation drives. More importantly, they observed how your crew thinks, how your command structure functions, and how your entire civilization approaches problems. Admiral Zethkar felt a chill that had nothing to do with ship temperature. The cultural exchange hadn't been a goodbye performance. It had been the most sophisticated espionage operation he had ever encountered, conducted under the guise of artistic expression while he personally supervised the collection of classified information. Our security protocols prevent any form of unauthorized data access. Chen's smile widened. Commander, your security protocols prevent unauthorized access to your computer systems. They don't prevent humans from looking around, listening to conversations, and remembering what they see. We didn't hack your databases. We simply paid attention. The statement revealed a fundamental gap in hegemony understanding of intelligence gathering. Their security was designed to prevent technological espionage, not observational analysis by beings whose brains were themselves sophisticated computational devices capable of processing and transmitting vast amounts of information. Furthermore, Chen continued, your analysis of our technology contained another significant error. You assumed that because our spacecraft used primitive propulsion and weapons systems, our entire technological base was primitive. But Admiral, we've had 17 orbital platforms analyzing your ships for the past 72 days. Every signal you've transmitted, every energy emission, every quantum fluctuation has been recorded and studied by the most advanced computational matrix humanity has ever built. Zethkar reviewed his tactical displays, focusing on the 17 orbital platforms that surrounded Earth. His initial analysis had dismissed them as simple communication arrays, too crude to pose any threat to hegemony operations. The possibility that they were actually sophisticated sensor and computational platforms had never been considered. What do you want? He asked. We want to offer you something unprecedented in hegemony history, Chen replied. We want to give you the opportunity to experience voluntary alliance rather than forced conquest. The words struck the bridge like a physical force. Alliance implied mutual benefit between equals, a concept that had no place in hegemony expansion protocols. For 4 millennia, the hegemony had grown through absorption of inferior species who contributed raw materials and labor to the greater whole. The idea of partnership with a species that might offer intellectual rather than physical contributions was outside their conceptual framework. Alliance implies mutual benefit, Zethkar said carefully. What could humanity possibly offer the hegemony that we cannot take through standard integration protocols? Chen gestured again, and the display changed to show something that made Admiral Zethkar's staff freeze in stunned recognition. A detailed analysis of hegemony expansion patterns over 4,000 years, complete with mathematical models predicting future growth limitations and resource constraints. Admiral, Chen said quietly, your empire is failing. The statement was so shocking that several bridge officers gasped aloud. The hegemony was the dominant force in the galaxy, controlling thousands of systems and incorporating new species regularly. The concept of failure was inconceivable. Elaborate, Zethkar demanded, though something in his voice suggested he was beginning to understand what Chen was about to tell him. Your expansion model is mathematically unsustainable, Chen explained, her mathematician's training evident in her precise language. Each new system requires increasing resources to maintain, while contributing diminishing returns to overall efficiency. Your current rate of expansion will result in logistical collapse within approximately 200 years. The mathematical projections that filled the screen were complex, detailed, and utterly damning. They showed resource allocation curves, administrative overhead calculations, and communication lag analyses that painted a picture of an empire approaching critical mass. Most disturbing was the accuracy of the analysis. Every figure matched classified hegemony economic reports that humanity should have had no access to. These projections assume no external pressures or resource shortages, Chen continued. Add in the resource depletion you're already experiencing in core systems, the increasing administrative costs of managing diverse species with conflicting requirements, and the communication delays inherent in governing an empire spanning thousands of light years, and collapse becomes inevitable. Admiral Zethkar found himself staring at mathematical proof of something that hegemony leadership had been refusing to acknowledge for centuries. The Empire's expansion had become a requirement rather than a choice, driven by the need for new resources to support increasingly unwieldy administrative structures. They weren't conquering species to grow stronger, they were conquering species to avoid growing weaker. "Even if your analysis is accurate," he said slowly, "it merely describes problems. It offers no solutions." Chen's expression grew serious. "Admiral, that's where you're wrong. We've been analyzing your empire for 72 days, and we've identified 17 different approaches to sustainable governance that could extend hegemony viability indefinitely. But implementing these solutions requires something the hegemony has never possessed: species who choose to contribute their intellectual capabilities rather than being forced to provide only their physical resources." The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't offering submission. They were offering partnership in solving problems that threatened the hegemony's long-term survival. More incredibly, they had apparently identified solutions to issues that hegemony analysts had been struggling with for generations. "Prove your claims," Zethkar demanded. Chen nodded. "Captain Vasquez, please demonstrate Solution Alpha." The tactical display suddenly lit up with new contacts as the indomitable spirit reappeared, not where it had vanished, but positioned behind Admiral Zethkar's flagship at point-blank range. Simultaneously, similar contacts appeared throughout the hegemony fleet as 17 additional human vessels materialized inside the formation's defensive perimeter. "What you're seeing," Chen explained calmly, "is an application of your own gravitational manipulation technology. We've created a limited displacement field that allows near-instantaneous travel across short distances." Admiral Zethkar stared at the tactical display showing human vessels positioned to deliver crippling attacks against his entire fleet. The technology was clearly based on hegemony principles, but the mathematical applications were unlike anything his scientists had developed. More disturbing was the realization that humanity had successfully reverse-engineered and improved upon hegemony technology in less than 72 days. "You could have destroyed my fleet," he said quietly. "Yes," Chen confirmed. 18 human vessels armed with enhanced versions of your own weapons could cripple your entire formation before your defensive systems could respond. But Admiral, we're not interested in destroying your fleet. We're interested in joining it." The statement reframed the entire encounter in terms that Admiral Zethkar struggled to process. Humanity hadn't been conducting a desperate last stand. They had been conducting a job interview. Every aspect of their behavior, from the cultural exchange to the technological demonstration, had been designed to prove their value as potential allies rather than their courage as doomed resistance fighters. "What are you proposing?" he asked. Chen smiled. "We're proposing that the hegemony gain its first voluntary member species. Humanity offers to contribute our technological innovation, mathematical analysis, and creative problem-solving capabilities to help resolve the Empire's systemic issues. In return, we request representation in hegemony governance and the right to maintain our cultural identity while participating in galactic civilization." The proposal was unprecedented in 4,000 years of hegemony expansion. No species had ever requested to join the Empire as equals rather than subjects. The concept of voluntary membership, with its implications of shared decision-making and cultural preservation, was so far outside established protocols that Admiral Zethkar lacked any framework for evaluating it. "The hegemony does not negotiate with primitive species," Commander Veltar protested. "Integration protocols are non-negotiable." But Admiral Zethkar was studying the tactical display where 18 human vessels sat motionless inside his fleet formation, their weapons powered down despite having achieved perfect firing positions. The demonstration had been flawless. Overwhelming technological superiority combined with restraint that proved intelligence and reliability. "Dr. Chen," he said slowly, "your proposal requires authorization from Hegemony Central Command. I lack authority to negotiate alliance terms." "We understand, Admiral," Chen replied. "But we're hoping you'll be willing to recommend our proposal to your superiors. As evidence of good faith, we're prepared to share our analysis of hegemony structural problems, along with our proposed solutions. We're also prepared to demonstrate additional technological innovations that might prove useful to the Empire." Admiral Zethkar found himself in a position he had never imagined, considering whether to recommend that the hegemony change 4,000 years of expansion policy because a primitive species had made a compelling argument for voluntary cooperation. But as he looked at the tactical display showing human vessels that could have destroyed his fleet but chose not to, and at the mathematical projections that suggested his empire was heading toward inevitable collapse, Admiral Zethkar realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented. They had made change appear not just possible, but necessary. "Dr. Chen," he said finally, "I will recommend that Hegemony Central Command evaluate your proposal. However, I should warn you that the Empire does not change its policies easily." Chen's smile suggested confidence in humanity's ability to be persuasive. "Admiral, we've spent 72 days preparing for this conversation. We're prepared to be very convincing." As the communication ended, Admiral Zethkar found himself staring at displays that showed a single small planet that had somehow challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization. The humans had proven that they could fight, that they could innovate, and most importantly, that they could offer solutions to problems the hegemony hadn't even admitted it was facing. For the first time in 4 centuries, Admiral Zethkar was going to recommend that the hegemony consider something other than conquest. The question now was whether an empire built on 4,000 years of forced expansion could adapt quickly enough to accept partnership with a species that refused to behave according to the rules. 6 months after first contact, Admiral Zethkar stood in what had once been the briefing room of his flagship but was now something entirely unprecedented in hegemony history, a joint command center staffed by both aliens and humans working side by side. The transformation had taken place gradually, but the sight still struck him as profoundly strange. Hegemony officers with their crystalline features and precise movements worked alongside humans whose chaotic energy and constant improvisation had initially seemed like symptoms of barely controlled insanity. Now, Admiral Zethkar was beginning to understand that the chaos was actually a form of order that the hegemony had never learned to recognize. "Admiral," called Dr. Sarah Chen from her position at the Central Analysis Station, "we're receiving the final reports from the Beta Centauri integration project. The results exceed all projections." Zethkar moved to review the displays, still adjusting to the human practice of sharing information across all command levels rather than maintaining strict hierarchical control. The Beta Centauri system had been the first test of humanity's proposed voluntary integration protocols, and the results had been nothing short of revolutionary. "Summarize the key findings," he requested. Dr. Chen gestured to the holographic displays that now filled the command center. The Kethari species at Beta Centauri not only agreed to join the hegemony voluntarily, they actively contributed to improving the integration process. Instead of the standard 18-month forced incorporation timeline, voluntary integration was completed in 6 weeks. More significantly, Kethari productivity has increased by 400% compared to standard integration projections. The numbers were staggering. Traditional hegemony integration involved occupation, resistance suppression, infrastructure reconstruction, and gradual population compliance over multiple years. The process was expensive, time-consuming, and resulted in subject species who contributed minimal innovation to imperial development. The Kethari, presented with humanity's proposal for voluntary alliance, had not only agreed immediately but had actively worked to optimize their own integration. Their scientists had collaborated with hegemony engineers to improve system-wide efficiency. Their cultural leaders had helped design governance structures that preserved local autonomy while contributing to imperial goals. Most importantly, they had begun developing new technologies specifically designed to enhance hegemony capabilities. "What about resistance from Central Command?" Zethkar asked. Commander Torres, humanity's military liaison, looked up from her tactical displays. "Decreasing steadily, Admiral. The economic benefits of voluntary integration are becoming impossible to ignore. 3 more star systems have formally requested evaluation for alliance status rather than waiting for traditional conquest schedules." The transformation had not been easy. Hegemony Central Command had initially rejected humanity's alliance proposal with the outraged certainty of an organization that had never questioned its fundamental assumptions. The idea that primitive species might offer valuable contributions, that voluntary cooperation could be more efficient than forced compliance, and that the Empire might benefit from changing its methods had been dismissed as impossible, but humanity had been prepared for resistance. Dr. Chen had led a delegation to the hegemony capital world of Zentara Prime, carrying with them detailed analyses of imperial economics, projected resource depletion timelines, and mathematical models showing how voluntary integration could extend empire viability by millennia rather than centuries. More importantly, they had brought working demonstrations of technological improvements that could immediately benefit hegemony operations. The breakthrough had come when human mathematicians had solved a logistics problem that hegemony engineers had been struggling with for decades. The challenge of coordinating resource distribution across thousands of star systems had created communication delays and efficiency losses that were slowly strangling imperial growth. Humanity's solution involved quantum-entangled communication networks combined with predictive algorithms that could anticipate resource needs across multiple systems simultaneously. The technology worked. Within weeks, hegemony logistics efficiency had improved by 30%. Administrative overhead dropped by 15%. Communication delays that had plagued the Empire for generations were effectively eliminated. Central Command had authorized expanded human participation in Imperial operations. Admiral, announced Intelligence Officer Cathara, long-range sensors detect the approach of the diplomatic convoy from the Andromeda system. They're requesting permission to discuss alliance terms. Zethkar nodded, his attention focused on displays showing a star system that had independently developed space travel but lacked the industrial base for interstellar expansion. Under traditional protocols, the Andromeda system would have been conquered, its population incorporated as laborers, and its resources allocated to imperial needs. Under humanity's new voluntary integration model, they were arriving as potential partners in galactic civilization. Dr. Chen, status of the integration proposal for Andromedas. Chen reviewed her analysis displays. Preliminary assessment suggests excellent compatibility for alliance membership. The Andromedans have developed advanced biotechnology that could complement existing hegemony capabilities. Their social structure emphasizes collective decision-making, which aligns well with the collaborative governance models we've been developing. Most importantly, they've indicated genuine interest in contributing to galactic civilization rather than simply avoiding conquest. The success of voluntary integration had surprised everyone, including humanity. Species approached as potential allies rather than conquered subjects consistently demonstrated higher productivity, greater innovation, and stronger loyalty to imperial goals. The economic benefits were so significant that Central Command had begun pressuring Admiral Zethkar to accelerate the conversion to voluntary protocols. But the changes went deeper than economics. The hegemony itself was beginning to transform in ways that no one had anticipated. Admiral, called Captain Morrison from the Human Tactical Station, were receiving updates from the joint research projects. The innovations are exceeding all projections. Admiral Zethkar reviewed the reports with growing amazement. When different species were allowed to maintain their cultural identities while contributing to shared goals, the results were exponentially more productive than forced integration. Human creativity combined with hegemony engineering precision had produced technological advances that neither species could have achieved alone. Cathari biotechnology merged with human medical knowledge had led to breakthrough treatments that benefited all species. Andromeda collective decision-making processes had improved hegemony administrative efficiency across multiple sectors. The Empire was becoming something it had never been before, a genuine civilization where different species contributed their unique strengths to common purposes rather than being forced into identical compliance. There's something else, Dr. Chen added, her expression suggesting she was about to share information of particular importance. We've been analyzing the long-term implications of voluntary integration, and we've identified an unexpected benefit that could revolutionize imperial expansion. Admiral Zethkar's three eyes focused on her with interest. Explain. Chen activated new displays showing galactic survey maps. Traditional conquest requires massive military resources to overcome resistance and maintain control. Voluntary integration eliminates those costs entirely. But more importantly, allied species actively seek out other potential alliance candidates. They become advocates for the hegemony rather than conquered subjects. The implications were staggering. Instead of requiring military force to expand, the hegemony could potentially grow through voluntary recruitment facilitated by existing allied species. The economic savings alone would be enormous, but the strategic advantages were even more significant. The Cathari have already identified 6 star systems in their region that might be excellent alliance candidates, Chen continued. The Andromedans have mentioned 3 more. Instead of conquest requiring decades of preparation and massive resource allocation, voluntary expansion could proceed at unprecedented speed with minimal military investment. Admiral Zethkar found himself contemplating a future that would have been inconceivable 6 months earlier. The hegemony could become a true galactic civilization, growing through voluntary cooperation rather than forced expansion, benefiting from the active contributions of allied species rather than the reluctant compliance of conquered populations. But the transformation also raised questions that challenged everything he had believed about imperial governance. Dr. D. Chen, he said thoughtfully, if the hegemony continues to evolve in this direction, what prevents allied species from eventually demanding equal representation in Central Command? What prevents the Empire from becoming a confederation of equals rather than a hierarchical imperial structure? Admiral, who says those would be problems to prevent rather than improvements to achieve? The question struck Admiral Zethkar with the force of revelation. For 4,000 years, the hegemony had maintained power through superior force and centralized control. The idea that shared power might actually increase imperial strength rather than diminishing it was revolutionary, but the evidence was becoming undeniable. Allied species are more productive, more innovative, and more loyal than conquered subjects. Voluntary cooperation achieved better results than forced compliance. Shared decision-making produced more effective solutions than centralized authority. Humanity had not just offered technological improvements to the hegemony, they had offered a fundamental transformation of what the Empire could become. Incoming transmission from Central Command, announced Communications Officer Park. Priority 1 classification. The main display activated, revealing Supreme Commander Vexthal, the ultimate authority of hegemony forces. His appearance in a joint command center where humans worked alongside hegemony officers would have been unthinkable months earlier, but the economic benefits of voluntary integration had forced even the most conservative elements of imperial leadership to reconsider their assumptions. Admiral Zethkar, the Supreme Commander began. Central Command has completed its analysis of voluntary integration results. The economic benefits justify expanded implementation of human protocols across all expansion sectors. Admiral Zethkar felt a moment of profound satisfaction. The species that had challenged his fleet with a single improvised ship had successfully convinced the galaxy's dominant empire to fundamentally change its approach to expansion and governance. However, Supreme Commander Vexthal continued, Central Command requires clarification on long-term implementation strategy. If voluntary integration continues to prove superior to traditional conquest, what role will military forces play in future expansion operations? The question went to the heart of the transformation that humanity had initiated. If the hegemony could grow through voluntary cooperation rather than military conquest, the need for vast military fleets would diminish dramatically. The resources currently allocated to weapons and warships could be redirected toward exploration, research, and development projects that would benefit all allied species. Dr. Chen stepped forward to address the Supreme Commander directly. Sir, we believe military forces will remain essential, but their role will evolve. Instead of conquest fleets, the hegemony will need exploration vessels, diplomatic ships, and defense forces to protect allied systems from external threats. The military will become the shield that protects galactic civilization rather than the sword that expands it. Supreme Commander Vexthal considered her words carefully. Dr. Chen, you are suggesting that the hegemony transform from a conquering empire into a protective confederation? We're suggesting that the hegemony become what it has always claimed to be, Chen replied, a force for order, progress, and civilization in the galaxy. The difference is that allied species will choose to participate in that mission rather than being forced to submit to it. The transmission ended, leaving the Joint Command Center in thoughtful silence. Admiral Zethkar looked around at the mixed crew of humans and aliens working together, solving problems that neither species could have addressed alone, creating innovations that benefited everyone. 6 months earlier, he had commanded a conquest fleet approaching a primitive planet whose inhabitants possessed nothing but stubborn refusal to surrender. Today, he commanded the first truly cooperative military force in galactic history, leading an alliance that was transforming the fundamental nature of interstellar civilization. Admiral, called Captain Morrison, long-range sensors detect 3 more diplomatic convoys requesting permission to discuss alliance terms. Word is spreading fast. Admiral Zethkar smiled, an expression that his crew had learned was borrowed from human emotional displays. The species that believed they knew war had learned something more valuable than military tactics from humanity. They had learned the difference between conquering an enemy and gaining an ally. The hegemony had spent 4,000 years proving its strength through conquest. Now it would spend the next 4,000 years proving its wisdom through cooperation. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species who might have chosen resistance over submission were receiving messages that offered partnership rather than ultimatums. The humans had been right about one thing. Some wars weren't won by those who should win them. They were won by those who changed what winning meant. Admiral Zethkar stood in his transformed command center, watching displays that showed not conquered territories but allied civilizations, and realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had defeated an empire not by destroying it, but by making it better than it had ever imagined it could be. The greatest victory was not conquest, but transformation. And in the end, the species that believed they knew war had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, the strongest response to overwhelming force was not resistance, but the offer of friendship. The galaxy would never be the same.